One of the biggest fights in middleweight history, something that's out of a comic book at this point. Alex Pereira to fight Adesanya for a third time, this time in MMA. Though it was a fight that I always wanted, I never actually thought that the UFC would get it made. But once they announced the Sean Strickland fight, I realized that was maybe something that could act as a shortcut for Alex. And obviously, once he KO'd him, it kind of had to get made, so here we are. Now, this is actually one of the most intriguing and actually odd title fights that they've ever made, mainly due to how early it is in Alex's MMA career. This is his 8th MMA fight ever, so it must be one of the, if not maybe the quickest routes to a UFC title fight in history. Funnily enough though, in my opinion, this is actually Izzy's toughest title defense thus far. And I'm going to list the reasons why and also give you my breakdown of how I think the fight is going to go. One of the reasons being that, in my opinion, the fight is going to stay mainly standing, if not standing the whole way through from start to finish. I've heard many people say that they predict Adesanya to shoot at some point or for it to just end up on the ground at some point, and I don't think people realize just how difficult offensive grappling actually is, especially when you compare it to defensive grappling. And based off what I've seen in Alex's MMA career so far, his takedown defense seems to be on point. It's not the best in the division, but it doesn't have to be when fighting Adesanya. And given the fact that Alex has been training MMA for at least 6 years minimum now, and has been training with the likes of Glover Teixeira, it's hard to imagine him getting controlled for large periods of the fight. And also, just given Izzy's history with Alex in their 2 kickboxing bouts and all the trash talking that's gone into this fight, including Izzy talking about how he's going to freeze him and make him dance, etc., it might just be a bad look for Izzy to engage in the grappling too much. Now, another reason why I think Alex is extremely competitive in the fight is due to the fact that in his last 5.5 years since their last fight, he's had 12 kickboxing fights compared to Izzy's 0. Now, this is important to note because even though Alex won those last 2 fights with Adesanya, in most parts of those fights, he's actually getting outstruck, especially in the second fight in which, even though he finishes Adesanya, he himself was about to get finished multiple times. However, since then, due to the fact that Alex has kept bouncing back and forth between MMA and kickboxing over the last 5.5 years, it's meant that Alex's striking has actually improved the most out of the 2, especially considering the fact that Adesanya has been having to fight the likes of Marvin Vettori and Paulo Costa, who, though very skilled MMA fighters, are nowhere near the competition that Alex has been fighting up until as recent as late 2021, where he was fighting the current light heavyweight champion and actually going toe-to-toe. Not to say that this makes Alex the favorite going into the fight, it does help him close the gap on Adesanya, who otherwise should have a major advantage when it comes to MMA experience. He's been fighting in 5-round fights all the way since 2019, whereas this is Alex's first 5-round fight in the UFC or in MMA in general. Another major factor is the glove aspect of the fight. Many people know just how powerful Alex is. He has one of the scariest left hooks in all of combat history, if not the single scariest, and not just his left hook. All of his hooks, all of his straights, everything he does is explosive, it has meaning. Now, he's a very different fighter to Adesanya. He doesn't use feints and fakes and little trickery and movement as well as Adesanya does. Not to say that he doesn't have those type of skills himself, he does. He's shown them in his MMA career so far. But when he looks to engage, he's only really throwing things that he means to land and that he means to hurt people. So naturally, you would think that the fact that they're now going to basically have a kickboxing fight in MMA gloves, it would actually favor Alex Pereira, but I'm not sure it's as big of an advantage as people are making out, because if you watch the 2017 fight, Adesanya himself is doing a lot of damage. So you could argue that if Adesanya had MMA gloves in that fight, he could have finished that fight before getting hit with that big left hook later on. So I think in that regard, people need to put some more respect on Adesanya's name, because with MMA gloves, if he's able to put that kind of pressure on him consistently, he would actually nullify that and get the finish himself. But that's a big question. Can he now do that in 2022 in an MMA fight? Can he land those shots? Can he pick up those rounds? And can he even maybe get the finish? And that brings me on to my final prediction. Personally, I feel that for Adesanya to pick up these rounds and to maybe even get the finish, he has to be able to deploy his leg kicks and his general kicking game the way he has against Marvin Vettori, against Paulo Costa, against Jared Cannonier, against Robert Whittaker. All fights in which he was able to control his opponents using range and using his kicking game. And ironically, the one time that he's actually lost in the UFC has been to someone who's shut that down. John was able to check kicks efficiently, he was able to catch kicks efficiently, and he was able to land kicks efficiently. Now, Alex might not be catching the kicks as much as John was because John was going to always use that as a takedown threat. But this is where people have to realize the level kickboxer that Alex Pereira is. He's not your normal MMA high-level striker. He's even another level than the Johns and the Robert Whittakers, and he's able to check kicks efficiently, land kicks efficiently, and if he's able to do that as the fight goes on, Izzy's own attacks are going to decrease. And this is where I'd say that I lean ever slightly, like 51% towards Alex Pereira, because even though I don't think he's going to pick up all the rounds, and if the fight goes into the 4th and 5th, he might actually be behind on the scorecards. I just think if he starts to limit Izzy's ability to control the range and is able to stay safe himself in the pocket and not get overzealous, he's eventually going to land. It might be a straight, it might be a hook, it might be a knee, but it's hard to imagine him causing all of those collisions, consistently fighting at that pace that he fights and not eventually landing a hook, not eventually landing something that can put Izzy out. So, ever slightly, I do make him the favorite, and my own personal prediction is Alex via late TKO. Could happen at any time, but I think the 4th or the 5th is most likely. I feel really bad picking against Adesanya, given the champion that he is and how consistent he's been. I can easily see him getting the decision or even a TKO himself, but I'm going to ride with Alex on this one.